This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm your host for today's show, Maura Donley. Our usual host, Charlie Greenwald, is on assignment, but he'll be back with us very soon. My co-host today is Jere Strittmatter. Welcome, Jere.
Thank you, Maura.
Jere is a member of the Board of Directors of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. It's very nice to have you with me here today.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Well, everyone's talking about the budget, or lack of budget, depending on your perspective. And we have a great guest here with us today, one of our favorite guests, former Senator Mike Brubaker, who is the current CEO of Blackford Ventures. Welcome, Mike.
Maura and Jere, it's great to be with you.
You bring an interesting perspective to the budget discussions because you served in the Senate and you also are out in the private segment now. So that's why we like having you. So let's start out talking about some of your experiences with budgets, and what do you think about what's happening right now?
Well, thank you so much, Maura and Jere. Always great to be with you. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be talking about this process. Number one, it's embarrassing, personally. And I'm not talking about a single person, but I think the fact that Pennsylvania is in a budget meltdown or stalemate is frankly embarrassing. Now, you can make the argument that the legislative process allows for this to happen, and it does. So there's this fundamental difference of opinion on shrinking the size and scope of government versus increasing taxation, therefore stalemate. Democratic governor, Republican House and Senate. But never in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a governor done a budget address in February without the prior budget being signed. Right. It's incredible.
It's history making, but not in a good way.
So, well, I think what we ought to do is make it into something good. Turn the conversation in a positive direction, which is to the people of Pennsylvania. Is this process, push and pull, on public policy acceptable? Yes or no? If the answer is no, and I believe most people would say, no, this is not really a hot way to run a railroad. If the answer is no, then what can the General Assembly put in place, new rules that would, because other states have it, that would prevent budget impasses in the future from occurring? By example, Senator Eichelberger in the Pennsylvania State Senate right now has a bill that essentially says if the General Assembly and the governor can't, and the future General Assemblies and future governors can't come to an agreement, then the prior budget, minus a little bit on every single line item, gets passed. And if they want to, in the future, if they want to increase those lines, they can through the legislative process. But at least there's something in place.
Right.
So I think it's time to have that conversation.
Okay, let me ask you that, because this is the first time I'm hearing this sort of idea. What if the prior budget was from a completely different governor and you've got a brand new governor that ends up in an impasse? Still the same thing would happen?
Same thing.
So he has to, whether he likes it or not, adopt a budget that was in place the prior year.
The states that have this provision, when there is a budget impasse, the prior budget
just remains in effect.
Remains.
Okay.
And because the revenues continue to come in.
Right.
And what's been happening, of course, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we've had revenue streams coming in, the government, in some cases, holding some of those pots of money, not driving those out to their intended destinations, and then there's pain and suffering. There are not-for-profits, of course, we all know, that are borrowing money, and then they have to pay the interest on that money. The government is very likely, once that's resolved, not going to pay that interest. That not-for-profit now is out a significant amount of interest payment. That's just not acceptable, in my opinion.
So aren't we kind of making it easier for the members of the General Assembly to not do their jobs if we do that?
Well,
I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
I introduced, when I was in the Senate for 8 years, and my last 4 years I was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. I introduced many bills. Two bills I introduced. One was to go back to a two-year budget. We're in a one-year budget now, and prior to the starting of the show, Jere reminded me that he's right, we used to have two-year budgets in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, now we have 1 year. So I introduced a bill to go back to a two-year budget. That did not gain any traction. I also introduced a bill that said the members of the General Assembly, House and Senate, and the executive branch, if a budget's not passed on time, they don't get paid.
Oh, there you go.
And we used to not get paid, and then we would get paid retroactively. So I would say, I said to the citizens when I was in the state Senate that one of our most important jobs, in my opinion, is to pass a budget on time. And if we, in the private sector, when you don't do one of the most important functions of your job, you either get a pay cut, you get a lecture, or very likely you get fired.
You lose your job.
You lose your job. Well, my bill, which did not pass, I couldn't even get it, the committee chair to take it up, which would say members don't get paid. And by doing that, it would put some pressure on the members to come together and get something done.
Obviously, good ideas need to be addressed all the time. We've been here, since William Penn. You guys started in 1681.
You've been here since William Penn.
Well, Abraham Lincoln's speech was really that short. I can tell you. But historically, we have gone back and forth. So I think they're good ideas, that you're bringing forth, and that they've been brought before, and hopefully bad experiences will be remembered. But you're right. Maybe some fundamental changes need to be done. But I would say, wouldn't you have to look at the executive and taking everybody there, or else the executive would say, well, that's fine, I never need to do this. We're always going to have an impasse. I'm just going to keep vetoing everything. This governor doesn't take his pay. He takes his pay because he has to, but then he gives it to charity. So how do you resolve that then? Do you take the governor's children and they're not allowed to be paid, or what? How's that going to work?
Well, where's the executive branch incentive to not have an impasse?
I would think it would rest with the voters. Ultimately, you're right. I mean, removing one's pay is meaningful to people that need to pay a check in order to pay their bills every week and every month. And then there's people that are in the General Assembly and in the executive branch that don't need that. And then it doesn't create that sense of urgency. But we need a sense of urgency. But I think if we back up, I think we take this awful situation of no budget, a split party, a Democratic Party in the executive branch, and a Republican Party in the General Assembly, and we take it to the people of Pennsylvania. And we, through a series of nonpartisan, thoughtful questions, is this process, this push and pull, government was designed, to kind of look ugly at times. And this is a mess. And it's designed to be a mess. I don't think this level of mess ought to be permitted. Right. So personally, I take the position that we ought, members of the General Assembly, like Senator Michael Brubaker and others, there's another member of the Senate, I can't recall the person's name, and at least 2 members of the House that are working on bills to put in budget impasse solutions. And I think that obviously those bills aren't going to go anywhere without discussion and debate, and I think it's time to have that debate. And I think that's the bright star in the mess that we're in.
Well, I worked in state government and state employees weren't paid when the budget was passed, and that was a high incentive for it to get passed because state employees would rally and raise hell basically about the whole situation. They've changed that, and I'm not sure that was necessarily for the good because it did have an impact on getting things done. But I do agree, making the members of the General Assembly not get their pay would probably be as impactful. So it would be good to see.
Like the name of our show, Behind the Headlines, that's what's great. We're discussing this, and it's nice that there are people that are talking about this, but like with everything else, the devil's in the details. And so, in a way, you could say that this mess has gotten to this mess because we do have these automatic spends. In fact, the legislature went ahead with stopgap, measures. The governor vetoed it totally one time. Then the next time he did do part of it, and then now we find out that maybe illegally or against the Constitution, the governor and the treasurer have been spending dollars that have been coming in because they think they should be spent, without going to the appropriations. So, but as I say, this is great for our viewers, and what's nice to know is that our viewers are watching this. You can tell we're in a presidential election. We have the same problem at the federal government of not being responsive, when they should. And so I look at that as optimistic that there's a lot of people getting involved, come up with better ideas, and like your ideas, I think they can be tried. But then, like with any reform, what we found in history, that you have to go back, that we've done it before. So you have to go back and say, okay, we're doing this reform because we need it now, but why did we get to this mess? Why didn't we do it before? Why did we change from when we had this before? And then you have to go back and study that and then see, well, what were the problems, and address those as well, so we just don't go back and forth, creating the same problems by going back to, to another reform. But I know that you've thought of that. And how about your experience? You were the chairman of the taxing committee there. How did that go when you were in versus under this administration?
I'm not able to. I was chair of the Senate Finance Committee for 4 years, and prior to that, chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. So I did had the blessing to have that experience. The Finance Committee, you call it the Taxing Authority, you're right. So that's the committee where any taxation would come through. And we would debate tax issues very aggressively. I was one of the few Republicans that refused to sign a no tax increase pledge. And when I refused to sign it, I told my constituents who wanted me to sign it, said I wasn't going to sign it. And the reason I didn't want to sign that is that once you make a commitment to never vote for any tax increase, that means that, even a nickel on gasoline tax, if it all goes to transportation infrastructure. And I used that as an example. I would have voted for a gas tax because I know that we need transportation infrastructure improvements. And I voted for Act 89 when I was in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, the decade of funding for transportation. So I think that's critically important. So I think you need to have this dialogue with your constituents on what you're willing to do, the positions you're willing to take. And I think that's another benefit of today's era. I see a lot more citizens getting actively involved, especially in the presidential race, because of the tensions on both sides.
Right. I'd love to know, now that you're out in the private sector and you have these ideas about the budget and about this effect, I'd like to know, well, what effect has it had on the private sector? What's happened to job creation? What's happened to the job creators, because of this impact? And maybe you can just tease us a little bit and say a couple things, and then Maura's going to have to close
very good. She's going to go like that
Yeah.
very soon. Well, thanks for the question. This budget impasse has had some adverse effect on the private sector job growth. An example of that is RCAPs and other economic development tools that the state government uses to financially incentivize major projects to occur. So some of those approvals have been made, and the dollars have not been released. And when you're asking the government to help you finance a project because the government's requiring you to do road improvements, by example, when that occurs, you can't start the project until that government money is in. Yeah. So to stop a project or stop a project from beginning is really harmful to that project. In some cases, your clients that have been waiting will back out and go somewhere else.
Okay, Jere was right. We're going to have you back.
Okay, I'd love to come back.
I have a feeling this is going to be a timely issue for many, many months to come. So we would, as usual, love to have you back. And Jere's going to be back with William Penn any day now as a guest. Join us for another segment of Behind the Headlines coming up next.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by Blackford Ventures, LLC, a private equity firm seeking to make significant investments in real estate, proven business enterprises, and their leaders. Find out more at www.blackfordventures.com. And by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to the next segment of Behind the Headlines. In this segment, Jere and I are still going to continue to talk about some budget-related issues, but we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some transportation funding. And our guest for this segment is Mr. Bob Latham, who is the Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors.
Great to be here.
Also, a foremost expert in transportation issues in Pennsylvania. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You build my ego up all you want.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, we
pleasure.
and the viewers count on you. That's why we like having you back,
Thanks,
so often, because you are so informative, and our viewers tell us that they learn a lot by listening to you, and you're able to take complicated issues and put them down to simplistic points that then we can move forward on. So with that, what's happening now is a lot of snow, but we want to get the roads being built.
Happens
so
when you
why
have a
don't you
lot-
tell us a little bit about what's happened at the state level?
What happens when you have a lot of snow is, of course, eventually here in Pennsylvania, the snow melts, and we have freeze thaw, and that is not good for concrete, steel, or anything else.
I encountered a few potholes yesterday while driving that were terrifying.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's early.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's early for the pothole
Yeah.
season, but it'll happen. I think one thing that I could say is that since we passed the transportation bill in 2013, we saw a huge improvement in the roads. Particularly in 2014, we were able to put that money onto the roads, so to speak. So we were focused on dealing with the pothole situation and also fixing our bridges, which is of paramount importance.
And we had a governor of one party, and we had the 4 caucuses of House and Senate, Republican and Democrat. They all got together, the 5, and passed that bill that you're talking about. Now we have a different problem. What's happening now that we have this budget impasse?
Well, one of the things that we've seen, and this has been occurring, I guess, if you will, but it's now come to a point where something has to be done. And that is, we're seeing more and more money that is dedicated in highway users, fuel tax increases, registration fee increases, which the voters essentially approved in Act 89 because practically everybody was reelected who voted for that. There were no issues with that at the voting booth. But what we see is more and more of this money that was dedicated for PennDOT to fix roads and bridges, make roads and bridges more safe, being shifted over to the state's general fund, which you've talked about here on the show, the general fund and the general fund budget. But it's being done by way of the state police budget. There is a portion of state police work that's done on highway patrol, but what's happened over the last 10 years is, and it's really accelerating now, is that in the budgetary process, both administrations and the General Assembly are taking money out of the transportation fund, out of the motor license fund, or PennDOT's ability to fix roads and bridges, and augmenting the general fund by way of the state police.
So that's not unusual, though. That has always been occurring.
There's been some, but the acceleration has been incredible. It's been going up at about 8% per year over the last 10 years. Since Act 89 passed, the proposal this year by Governor Wolf in his latest budget would have shifted nearly $200 million annually out of the road fund. That's out of about a $1.5 billion budget, so that's a significant portion of money that will not be able to be used to make bridges safer, fix interchanges, make roadways safer, and so on and so forth.
So you're saying that the potholes I'm encountering already are in danger of not being filled?
That's essentially it, yeah. And then there are also major projects which will not go on. I mean, when we passed Act 89, we had a lot of major bottlenecks and things, and I'll say specifically the project, State College, the completion of the State College bypass is not on the planning program now. So that was one of the marquee projects that was supposed to be completed. So that project is.
Make sure all our Penn State fans hear that.
All of you folks, unfortunately, because of this.
They drive it.
And what happens is they plan based on anticipated revenues. And if you look at the trend line on this money that's being shifted out of PennDOT's fund to the state police, or to the general fund, I will say, because I'm not really here today to say we shouldn't fund the Pennsylvania State Police. I mean, they should get what they need. We have tremendous problems. We have homeland security problems. We've got drug interdiction problems. Heroin is a tremendous problem now in Pennsylvania. It has to be dealt with. But not by taking the money out of roadway safety. We have to find a way to
Right.
fund those projects without, I'll use it's a trite phrase, robbing Peter to pay Paul. At the hearings earlier recently before the Senate and the House Transportation Committee, they asked former Secretary Barry Shoke to come in and sort of talk about this. And I think he put it best. He said, during the funding bill debate, the Act 89 debate, he said, I talked to every member of the General Assembly. He said, not one of you asked me to raise the gas tax to pay for the state police. They asked me to raise the gas tax in order to pay for roads and bridges.
Right, and to emphasize what you said, so we hear this isn't a bashing of the state police.
Absolutely not.
The state police do a great job. The problem is there's been this mission creep, going on, that what should be done at the local level and at the state level with other departments has crept over. Why? Because the state police are the most qualified. State police do a great job. We can count on them. So when county task forces set up to get rid of drug dealers, the state police have to be in it. When other issues that come up, all of a sudden then we're funding out of the state police. Other bad behavior that's out there, when local governments have trouble, meeting their needs, they've now disbanded their police departments, and then they're counting on the state police to have to come in and take care of that. So, we're going in the wrong direction.
That is part of the
And there's all this budget shifting. So I'm so glad you're here to let our viewers know what's going on so they can talk to their legislators to hold firm and saying transportation dollars should be done for transportation things.
After Act 89 was passed and we saw this issue starting to build and build and build, we did some polling last spring and we asked voters, how do you feel about taking money out of PennDOT's program and putting it into other programs? We didn't say specifically what. 80% of people said that's not a good idea. Because obviously when we were having this discussion, and historically what I pay through roadway fees, which is fuel taxes and registration fees and that sort of thing, I believe is going to pay for me to get from here to there safely.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of paying for some local government to disband their police force, so then the state police can pick it up.
Right. Well, the borough that I live in has a police department. I pay that through local taxes, but next door they decided, we'll get free state police. Well, it's not free. You and I and everybody's paying for it.
So our this legislation, our transportation funding legislation, has been held up on a national basis as something other states should look at, and because it was bipartisan. Why aren't the members of the General Assembly that supported this raising holy hell about it?
Well, I don't know about holy hell, but but they are starting. They are starting to tackle it. Let me back up and address your point because it's a good one. Act 89 is being held up as a model for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is it was addressed the entire transportation system. So it's not just PennDOT roads, but local roads. Public transit in our urban areas, which is very important, and then also what we refer to as the multimodal fund. But that's money for some money for short line railroads, alternate transportation, pedestrian facilities, bicycle, making roads safe for people to use bicycles on them, and some port money and all. So ports, airports, walking, biking, cars, trains, buses. All that, and our transportation system is. The thing about that is I mentioned 4 different funding sources. Only one of them is being siphoned off for the general fund, and that is the state road system. So we have a little bit of erosion in that theory of our model, and that's why they should be very much concerned about it, and they are because we've had a couple of hearings, both in the Senate Transportation, House Transportation, and there is some movement now to address the issue.
And we certainly don't want other states that have looked to us to have to put a little footnote at the bottom that says, however,
right.
it didn't quite work out the way that they expected. I mean, I do think that as taxpayers we need to be very enlightened and informed about what's happening here. I mean, I know every time I come up to a construction site and I'm slowed down or I'm stopped, I'm happy about it, and I don't have a problem with paying the tax because I know that the road is being improved. It's being made safer. Children can get on their school buses and get to school safely. So it's not good news to hear that it's being deflected or sent elsewhere.
Right, exactly. It
And
needs to be
especially because the governor just yesterday proposed, right, to take how much more?
another $60 million on top of the on top of the $750 million that's already being taken off. Now, let me just double back here on a couple things. First of all, you mentioned nationally, but let's talk about Congress. Congress did pass a 4-year transportation bill, which was a long time coming, and the drum roll is when they did it, it kept the funding just kind of like level. Flat. Literally, the additional amount of money coming to Pennsylvania over those 4 years is already being eaten up by this shift from the state highway fund to the general fund via the state police. So it just exacerbates this situation.
So what is your organization doing about this particular issue?
Well, I'm going to talk about that. The other thing is, you mentioned highway work zones. One of the things that I want to tell your viewers about is that when we do some research and look at what the public is interested in, and we talk about safety, that's very important. Because we have more work going on, and it's all fixing, it's not new, people are driving through more and more work zones. So we are looking, as an industry, construction design, engineering firms, working with PennDOT and the Turnpike, how we can make those work zones more safe, more user-friendly, if you will. Mm-hmm. Because right now, I drive too, and in some cases you drive into one and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to do. We want to eliminate that. We want people to feel better about what they're encountering, what they're experiencing, and what their responsibilities are. You need to slow down. We need to slow them down. Now, what are we doing about this? We're supporting House Resolution 622 that just passed out of the Transportation Committee to study the appropriate level of funding for the state police that could come out of the highway fund. After all, again, you do see state police out on the roads. Now, if 5,000 of them were doing 2/3 of their work on the roads, I think you'd see more of them. But the point is, there is an appropriate level. So we're saying, let's find out what that appropriate level is. We think $800 million is not the appropriate level, but there is an appropriate level. Let's find what that is, and then let's look at ways that we can fund the state police so they can do their job without interrupting the highway program.
Thanks. And with that, unfortunately, we are out of time. And so that just tells me, again, we have to have you back, because I think we're going to probably learn something from this, hopefully, study that's going to be done and completed on this issue.
Should be an interesting budget season.
Right, exactly.
This is just a piece of it.
We're just getting started. We're just getting warmed up in budget season.
Absolutely.
But we want to thank you so much for being here with
pleasure.
us today, and we would love to have you back to further discuss these issues, and hopefully we'll get some resolution. You'll get some resolution on them as we move forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Join us next time for another edition of Behind the Headlines.